Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 80 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 18th, 2023, the committee is meeting for a briefing on the mandate of the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Colleagues, appearing before us this evening is the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, the Honourable Sean Fraser, as well as Kelly Gillis, Deputy Minister, Infrastructure and Communities for the first hour. Welcome to you both. And for the second hour, we have Ms. Kelly Gillis once again, Deputy Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, and Marco Prasuti, Assistant Deputy Minister, Investment, Partnership and Innovation. Minister, I want to begin by saying how grateful we are for having you with us this evening. I'll turn the floor over to you, sir, for your opening remarks. You have 5 minutes.
May I just have a point of order on one issue?
Yes.
I just want to clarify housekeeping issue of whether or not we have 1 hour with the minister, or are we going to have 2 rounds?
We have 1 full hour with the minister, and then the minister will be leaving, and Mr. Prasuti will be coming to sit in his place, and there will be another hour with Ms. Gillis and Mr. Prasuti.
So there's no guarantee of 2 full rounds?
Well, if I'm doing the math here, Dr. Lewis, we should be able to get through 2 full rounds if we turn the floor over to the Honourable Minister for his opening remarks right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Minister, the floor is yours.
Excellent, et merci pour l'invitation de faire une appréciation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for this invitation to discuss the government's infrastructure priorities.
Look, I'll just share that this committee is where I spent the first few years as a member of Parliament after the 2015 election. It was my top choice at the time. I feel very fortunate to be able to serve in the capacity that I currently do. And I should point out that Mr. Badaway and Mr. Iacono in particular sat alongside me, and it's good to see you guys again. I'll be short with my comments to open so we can save time for questions and get through as many as committee members would like to have. But I'll start with the very basic premise that investing in infrastructure across this country is incredibly important. It creates jobs in the short term, and typically in good-paying jobs in industries that provide meaningful work to people. But it also leaves communities better off with assets that make the places that we all call home more livable, more sustainable, and more prosperous. The reality is, over the past 8 years, we've seen a significant increase in the scale of public investments in infrastructure by the Government of Canada. This was principally through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Plan that has led to many billions of dollars putting many thousands of Canadians to work and helping communities in every region of the country build out their communities in a way that serves the needs of their residents. There's a few specific areas that I think have been important to the work that we've done as a government and that will continue to be important in the years ahead. The first is public transit, and I won't regale you with the details or the specific number of projects or dollars spent, only to indicate that when we invest in transit, we build communities that work more effectively for the people who call them home. We've seen in small communities like mine and in big cities across the country, investments that are allowing people to better access the places that they go to work, the places that they live, and the services that they rely upon. The kinds of stories that I'm sure we've all heard in our constituency offices over our time as parliamentarians demonstrate the importance of public infrastructure and transit in particular. I can't help but think of one of the very first meetings I took in my constituency office where a gentleman told me that he was unable to find work because he didn't have access to transit in our community. He was limited in his job hunt to places he could walk because he didn't have access to a car. These are the kinds of social issues and economic issues that people struggle with at an individual level when they go without the services that so many of us too often take for granted. By making record investments in public transit, we can more easily facilitate people accessing economic opportunities for themselves, pursuing the activities that they enjoy and accessing the services that their families rely upon. But infrastructure is so much more than public transit. I think about the water and wastewater investments that rarely capture the public's imagination, but when you deal with a water line that bursts, you know you need it. In addition to making sure we have access to clean water and wastewater infrastructure that allows our communities to function. We need to realize the importance of continuing to invest in the things we can't see that unlock opportunities for what I'm sure is a top priority of nearly everyone sitting around this table, which is the need to build more homes. If we don't invest in the water and wastewater infrastructure that communities demand, we can't hope to even sustain the communities that we enjoy today, let alone experience the rate of growth that we would all like to see. Coming from Nova Scotia, it is particularly important to me that we continue to invest in climate resilient infrastructure. Over the past 12 months of my life, a little more than a year as of just a couple weekends ago, we've seen a once-in-a-century hurricane, a once-in-a-century floods and wildfires that we have never seen before. These have caused ungodly consequences for the people who live in my home province. They threaten critical infrastructure, and we know that we need to continue to reduce our emissions if we're going to combat climate change. But we also have to build communities that can better adapt to the consequences of climate change that are now baked in, given the pollution that has occurred across the world for the past many decades. In addition to continuing to invest in infrastructure that moves people and goods, that allows us to have livable communities, that expands water treatment so we can build homes and protects us against the consequences of climate change, we need to also be investing in communities, in community assets from recreational properties, cultural properties, heritage properties. When we actually make the kinds of investments that make communities not just places where a person can find somewhere to sleep, but a place where they can enjoy a full and meaningful life by engaging fully in their community, by participating in activities that allow them to experience fulfillment. We can build healthier people and healthier communities. We need to work together across levels of government, but if we do that, I'm convinced that we can build a more prosperous, sustainable, and healthy Canada for everyone in every region of the country. Mr. Chair, you've given me the signal that my time is up. I am happy to respect the clock and turn it over to you for questions. Merci.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll begin our line of questioning today with Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I want to ask you about one of the bank's projects that I find particularly concerning. The CIB has offered a $38 million to Kingsit Capital, the owner of the Fairmont Royal York Hotel in downtown Toronto, to retrofit the building and make it net zero. Why does the CIB need to fund Kingsit Capital, which is a private equity firm that has $17 billion in assets?
So the bank operates on commercial terms, and they operate independent of my office, and I think that's essential if they're going to function. One of the priorities for the bank is to invest in energy retrofits, and keep in mind that when they loan money to a proponent, that's money that's typically paid back. They may take risks at times, like any commercial enterprise would. But my belief is that by allowing the bank some flexibility to pursue goals including energy efficiency, we can actually achieve social outcomes that are important to Canadians, even when they engage private sector actors.
Let's talk about social outcomes. How many homes were created for the average Canadian from funding that $38 million Royal York Fairmont Hotel net zero retrofit project? How many homes were created for average Canadians by doing that?
That project didn't involve homes for Canadians. That was an energy retrofit of a different kind altogether.
Well, it is housing, so 0 homes for Canadians. Though I'm going to answer the question for you. It is actually 0 homes was created from that $38 million. And
yes.
Do you realize that the cheapest hotel room at the Royal York is $450 a night, and that the average Canadian cannot afford to stay at that hotel for even one night?
So that wasn't a housing development launched by the government. That was a commercial deal reached to improve the energy efficiency of the building that you're talking about.
So you chose to give $38 million to a private equity, a organization, a company that has $17 billion in assets to do a retrofit on a hotel, a luxury hotel, instead of funding retrofitted homes for Canadians?
No, there's a couple of objections I take to the pretense upon which that question rests. First, I made no such decision. The bank operates independent of my office, and I think that's very important. Second, when the bank loans money on commercial terms, the bank isn't giving money. It is loaning money to pursue an outcome of different kinds, in this case, a retrofit of a building. Third, the money that the bank would be putting into different projects, not just this, but others, is typically designed to not just build homes directly. We have other programs that contribute to those ends. But I don't mean to be
No,
puzzled,
thank you. I appreciate you explaining how the bank works, which I'm familiar with. But, Minister, my point is that these projects seem grotesquely elitist, and they're impoverishing Canadians. And we know that this hotel is a profitable luxury hotel, and yet the bank has chosen to fund a hotel to be retrofitted when Canadians barely have food to eat, when Canadians are sleeping in garages because they cannot afford apartments. And so my position to you is, do you not think that this is out of tune with the average Canadian and the need for Canadians to have affordable homes?
So I think there's distinct issues, and I think I would agree with you that we absolutely need to do more to build affordable housing, to grow housing stock, to support vulnerable people. You and I will be aligned on that till the day that I die. Where I have disagreement is that it may be possible, in my opinion, to both support vulnerable Canadians and to build more homes, while we have separate programs that operate on commercial terms that loan, not give away money, to allow institutions, organizations, or buildings to make themselves more energy efficient. In fact, I believe it's essential that we both pursue support for vulnerable people and fight climate change at the same time. And given that this is an independent entity that is dealing on commercial terms, I don't see that the money that could be loaned and paid back takes away from the ability of the government to fund projects separately.
Well, we have a $38 billion, the infrastructure bank is $38 billion, so it does take away from the projects that could be funded outside of that. And I would submit to you that these pet projects are out of touch with the reality of Canadians. Now, I know that you, in your role, you'd have to meet with these CEOs for updates. Have you met with the Fairmount CEO for an update to see how these funds are being spent?
No, I have not had a meeting with the CEO of the Fairmont on this particular project. I would point out, though, as well, that there's a lot of other projects the bank is invested in around energy efficiency, connectivity for communities, reducing emissions in public transit, investing in economic opportunities like small modular reactors. There's quite a range,
yes.
And I don't think that the individual project you've referred to encapsulates the full scale or scope of projects the bank is invested in to promote public good.
Now, Minister, how many more minutes do I have? 20 seconds. Do you agree that affordability should be a core principle of the National Building Code?
There's more to it than that, but I think anything we can do to promote affordability is important.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Iacono.
We now have Mr. Iacono. You have the floor. 6 minutes, please.
Minister, I'm a little puzzled with the questioning, and I'd like you to clarify something, because I don't think it's what my opposite friend across is stating with respect to the role and responsibility of the infrastructure bank. Can you please clarify that, and so that we know what limits we have, the government, as with respect to the banks?
Sure. So we, as the Government of Canada, created the Canada Infrastructure Bank. The purpose was to find new sources of capital that could be investing in infrastructure or in projects that generate positive social outcomes, whether they are building out communities, creating economic opportunities in growing industries, or making our communities more energy efficient. Perhaps I'm oversimplifying, but those are the kinds of priorities that the bank would be reflecting upon. It operates independently of government. I don't have the ability to say, pick this project and give them X dollars. We can flag the priorities for the government that they can then invest in. What we've seen is the bank has actually attracted billions of dollars in capital that otherwise would not have been invested to make our communities more vibrant, prosperous, or environmentally friendly. There is not necessarily an exact limit on the nature of projects, but there are priorities that they will pursue. But for what it's worth, I don't personally drive the investment decisions of the bank. I think that would actually be very dangerous. But its ability to operate independently on commercial terms is proving to be very successful. Despite a slower start, they've really accelerated the pace of investments, and I think it's going to have a very positive impact for the long term for Canadians.
Thank you, Minister, for that clarification. And also, I guess you must agree with the following, that is it important that housing and infrastructure files be linked under your mandate?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do agree. I think it's very important, and I think it's something that's going to create new opportunities. It's really obvious when you sit down and look at the opportunities to fund projects of the nature that we have funded over the last 8 years or so in government. I look at the water and wastewater investments that we've made that unlock housing. I look at public transit. We don't just move people around communities. We move them from the places that they live to the places that they work to the places where they receive services, whether that's taking your kids to soccer practice or whether it's taking a bus to a medical appointment and then getting back home. When we actually think holistically about where we're investing money in infrastructure, we can make better decisions about how we're going to either unlock more housing or make communities more livable for people. I think combining housing and infrastructure into a single ministry is going to allow us to be more efficient with the decisions that we take, and we can squeeze more productivity out of every federal dollar as a result, is my view.
Minister, what advantages can be attributed to allowing federal regulatory agencies to respond more swiftly to housing cost fluctuations in Quebec in order to promote greater stability in the province's residential market?
So which regulatory agencies are you referring to?
The ones that, federal regulatory agencies.
So I think responding quickly to changing dynamics when it comes to housing is extremely important. It's probably more important now than it has been in a very long time, given the rapidly shifting landscape around the need to build homes. And I should point out that province to province, there's also rules that protect the ability of people to remain in their homes in different ways. And with maybe a bit of ambiguity built into the question, and direct me if you want me to be more specific. But my sense is when you're dealing with a rapidly changing landscape when it comes to the cost of builders to build as a result of materials, supplies, land, interest going up, when you're dealing with an increasing pattern over the last number of years where people are displacing individuals from homes that were previously affordable, having the ability to act nimbly and respond quickly to a changing landscape for whatever reason is very important. But to answer with a greater degree of specificity, we can dig in perhaps offline on the specific agencies that you're most interested in.
Thank you. What specific actions were implemented to boost investments in affordable housing within Quebec, and what advantages does this bring to the province?
So there's a lot to chew on, and I think we'll have insufficient time to get through, so I'll apologize in advance for an incomplete answer. We have a number of different programs that directly fund affordable housing units. We've had the Rapid Housing Initiative. We've had bilateral agreements with different provinces. We're working now to secure an agreement with the province of Quebec on the Housing Accelerator Fund, all of which can contribute, and other programs as well, to building out more affordable housing stock. And Quebec has actually, in many ways, done a good job over the course of the last number of years. This is really important because we've had essentially my entire lifetime up until 2017, where the federal government, and I should say different governments, both liberal and conservative, have really stepped away from their role as a funder of affordable housing in this country by working with provincial governments. And Quebec is unique because we don't deal directly with municipalities as well, that we usually try to work out an agreement where we can participate as a funder in different housing projects that will allow more people to have access to a home that they can afford, whether in the market or outside of the market if their income doesn't allow them to find a home they can afford the way that many people can.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur Iacchino. Thank you, Minister. Prochainement, nous aurons...
We will now move on to Mr. Barcelo Duval. 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Minister. on your new assignment to a new department. We're very happy to have you with us tonight. All of last summer, I was solicited by all of the municipalities in my riding, and I wouldn't say just in my riding, but from around the province of Quebec. I got all sorts of letters from municipalities who were talking about the policies that existed and that were coming to an end in 2023. And we're starting 2024 soon. This is October, and we still don't know whether there is going to be any money for the City of Quebec with regard to this gas tax. Well, there are some challenges that we're facing right now. I know that the situation in Quebec is different from in other provinces, so it's very difficult for me to deal directly with the municipalities, especially when it comes to legislation called M30 in Quebec, which has a very specific application in Quebec.
For more precision. We are currently re-examining what's now called the Canada Community Building Fund, previously the gas tax. We're looking to make certain shifts to ensure that we're not just transferring money without having an understanding of what outcomes may be generated. And we, in fact, want to build in a stronger link between unlocking more housing potential within cities. We are working to establish a flow of money that municipalities can still rely on. Of course, it's typically through agreements with provinces that go to municipalities. But my expectation is that we're going to be able to continue to fund through the Canada Community Building Fund with some extra details.
On a reçu, en fait, au comité.
At this committee, we heard from a lot of communities, and I was privileged to be party to those discussions. And one of the things that became very clear, especially during our study of infrastructure, the communities said that the fund that they appreciated the most was the one for community development. And that is why the reason they particularly appreciated that was because it was an easy fund. There weren't all sorts of complicated conditions, whether it be a small or large community, they could have access to it, and it didn't take a whole lot of paperwork to get access to it. So this is my question. You seem to imply that you are going to deal with the housing problem through this gas tax. And I was wondering whether you are going to add some money to the gas tax to include housing, or are you saying that there are already too many conditions imposed on communities to get access to that? Because it seems that you are trying to make that available to do more things than it does now.
Yeah, we're in active discussions now with different provinces, including Quebec, about what will come next for the Canada Community Building Fund. My view is that across different programs, we need to do more to leverage the social outcomes that we want to see, including unlocking more housing. I do not want to compromise the simplicity of the program because that is a great strength. And I represent small towns and rural communities, and I've heard loud and clear that this program is something they very much appreciate because it has flexibility that allows them to focus on priorities. I don't necessarily envision that the Canada Community Building Fund will go to constructing new homes with the cash that will be used. In fact, I question how far that would go on its own, but making sure that we're using the fund in parallel to initiatives that are going to be resulting in more homes and more livable communities. I don't expect that we will further complicate the administration of the fund as a result.
Parlant de construction de nouvelles maisons, justement, en fait, les maires.
Talking about new housing builds, there were some mayors that came to see me, and most of them say that they would like to be able to build new houses. They would like to have new housing developments, but we're not able to do that because our wastewater systems are at their maximum. So one way to help cities to build new houses is to better fund the wastewater infrastructures. For example, the $32 billion should be invested in that. So there's a real hole that is stopping us from building more houses. With regard to the gas tax, well, that can be used to fund these wastewater infrastructures. I was wondering whether it would be possible to get access to that money as quickly as possible so that we can then build more houses.
Je suis tout à fait d'accord.
I fully agree with you. It's very important to invest in wastewater treatments in municipalities to make sure that we can then build more houses.
At all of our policies and figure out how we can better use them to not just build homes, but build the infrastructure that will allow more homes to be developed in communities that already want to build them. I think there's a gold mine there when we're trying to achieve the goal of making sure that everybody in Canada has a place to live. These are the kinds of discussions that we're having, not just on the Canada Community Building
Thank you,
Fund,
Minister.
but as we develop future infrastructure programs as well. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. Merci, Mr. Barcelou-Val. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being with us this evening. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me and the Mayor of Prince Rupert to discuss his city's infrastructure challenges. I know you're aware of the specific challenge that city faces, namely the age and condition of their drinking water infrastructure, especially their water mains, and the fact that last Christmas they had to declare a state of local emergency due to several water main breaks, and in fact officials fear the catastrophic failure of the entire system if something isn't done as soon as possible. The province has come in with an investment of $65 million to help fix the problem, and the city has applied to the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund for a similar size contribution from your government. I know that ministers don't typically make funding announcements at committee meetings, but I wonder if you could share with the committee and with me your government's posture on the project, how you understand the problem and what's at stake in Prince Rupert.
Thank you for the question and for arranging the meeting with Mayor Pond as well. I very much enjoyed the conversation, and as I shared with you earlier today, I had the chance to actually speak to him again since, as well as my provincial counterpart in British Columbia about this project and other infrastructure priorities. This is a great example of how what seemingly looks like a small project on paper can have an immense economic impact. So Prince Rupert, I'm sure everyone around the table knows, is home to a major port that the entire Canadian economy depends upon. To the extent that we have a disaster in the water treatment, water or wastewater systems in Prince Rupert, it's not just the residents, it's also the residents, which is important in its own right, but it's the entire supply chain across the Canadian economy that could be impacted if people can't live in the community who work at the port. The Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund was designed with projects like this in mind, where if something is to go wrong, we want to protect against the economic consequences that would follow a disaster of the kind that you've explained. So I won't create a new pattern of ministerial announcements in the middle of a process that's playing out. But my sense is that the fund was designed with projects like this in mind, and I hope to work towards a solution with you as the local MP, as well as Mayor Pond and the provincial government, because I believe something of national importance, such as the Canadian supply chain, demands the attention of all levels of government.
Fantastic. Thank you, Minister. Moving on to some other issues that face communities in the riding I represent. We've had Environment Canada and Fisheries and Oceans Canada express concern about communities' wastewater effluent, which is discharged either into the ocean or into rivers, and meeting various federal regulations. Of course, with climate change, this becomes even more of an issue because we're seeing lower flows in our rivers during drought periods. The community of Smithers, where I live, applied for a wastewater infrastructure project in 2020. They were denied. They went back to the drawing board, revised their proposal, reapplied in February of 2022, so over a year and a half ago. And they still haven't heard back with a response on their application. Meanwhile, they're struggling to meet the federal regulations when it comes to discharging effluent into a wild salmon river, home to a world-renowned steelhead fishery. This is a really treasured waterway, and of course they want to upgrade their infrastructure and do what's right to maintain the environment and treat the sewage properly. The village of Port Clements has a similar situation with their wastewater project, and this is a community of about between 300 and 400 people. And what they've seen over the years is that the construction cost escalations, while they wait for approval of their grant applications, has skyrocketed. So a project that in 2021 cost $2.5 million is now estimated to cost $4.5 million. So they're struggling to, and I believe in the case of Port Clements, they've been granted a portion of the project. But the problem we're seeing here is that communities are applying to do these projects, and the timeline for getting them done and the construction cost escalations is making it very difficult. I wonder how your government sees that problem and what it's doing to correct it.
So you raised two distinct issues, and I'll quickly try to address both. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair, so I can...
There's 1 minute and 10 seconds, Minister.
I will try to deal with them both swiftly. So I was involved when I was a parliamentary secretary to the Minister of the Environment on some of the wastewater effluent regulations. And this is actually a big deal on the West Coast because it's not just the steelhead salmon population that you're referring to. If you actually go down up the food chain, so to speak, when pollutants get stored in the salmon that orca eat, when they start to run out of food and draw on their fat supply, can actually have a damaging impact on the health of vulnerable orca populations as well. We need to deal with wastewater effluent challenges in every region of the country. We are trying to marry the advancement of a new regulatory framework with investments in water and wastewater that we have done at a level not seen in a very long time through the ICIP. I expect that's where people have applied to from your question. If I'm wrong, you can correct me. The way that process works is a bit challenging for me to speak to the process because typically we have the provincial government, who's a signatory to the bilateral agreement, take the applications and then send prioritized projects to the federal government, which, so long as they're eligible, we tend to fund. Happy to take this offline in the few seconds I have remaining because I don't think we're going to solve it during this exchange, and we can follow up on the cost escalation issue if we have more time because I'm sure I'm out.
Thank you, Minister. And Mr. Bachrach, you please know that you have 2.5 minutes in the next round to allow the Minister to respond. Next, we have Mr. Seaback. Mr. Seaback, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I'm going to ask some direct questions, and I hope that you're going to be able to give me just as direct an answer. I want to start with your recent announced GST rebate. How many homes has the GST rebate built?
You know this was announced a few weeks ago?
Yep.
So there have been many thousands announced, but the kinds of homes can't be built in a matter of weeks that we're dealing with. They're typically large developments, but there have been many thousands of units announced as a result of
That's the 5,000 unit that you talked about in House of Commons, correct?
That actually wasn't the one I was thinking of. That particular project involved 5,000. I've seen others of 3,000, 1,000, several hundred. I'm seeing in every region of the country significant announcements go ahead of thousands and thousands of units.
And how many homes have been built as a result of the Housing Accelerator?
Again, a program that launched a matter of weeks ago wouldn't have completed.
It was in budget 2022.
Yeah, it was funded. I'm sure you'll be aware during the City of London last month is when we began to roll that fund out. That's already yielding plans from cities that will result in thousands and thousands of homes, but given that it's been weeks, they are not yet complete.
Okay, so what's the estimate then that the GST rebate, how many homes is it estimated that will be built?
The estimates tend to range between 200 and 300,000 over the next decade or so.
Okay.
From that one policy change.
Okay, and how many is the estimate for the Housing Accelerator?
Over the next 3 years or so, it's about 100,000, but it will have a permanent impact given that it changes the way that cities build homes every year thereafter as well.
So that's about 400,000 units that you're suggesting as a result of these two policies. Is that correct? Approximately.
No, because the Housing Accelerator Fund, I'm only talking about the next few years. The GST estimate was over the next decade.
So then what is it for the next decade for the Accelerator Fund?
I don't have a number for you. If you extrapolate extrapolated it, the 100,000 over the next 3 years to 10 years, presumably you could triple it, but it doesn't operate that way. So I can't give you a number beyond the 3 years because it's too hard to predict how zoning changes will result in behavior change. There's a lot of market forces at play that would change that are outside of the control of any level of government, frankly.
So, well, even if we took it that way, then that would be about $300,000, 300,000 units for the Housing Accelerator, 300,000 units approximately for the GST rebate. Am I in the ballpark?
You might be, but I can't say that with confidence on the Housing Accelerator Fund because of the explanation I gave you a moment ago.
Okay, so last week at HUMA, you stated that this is a housing crisis. That was in your opening statement. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so what you're saying to me, these signature programs that you're touting as Canadians that's going to solve the housing crisis as you've described it is about 600,000 units. You're aware that CMHC put out a report that we need to build 3 million more houses than we normally build. So normally over to 2030, we're going to build 2 million houses. We need to build 3 million more than that. And the signature program that you are saying is going to solve the housing crisis is 600,000 units. How can this program have such an absolute lack of ambition?
So a couple of really important points to understand. First of all, it's about 3.5 million additional homes that we expect we need to build. The GST removal on apartment construction is an essential ingredient to solving the housing crisis. It won't do it on its own. You've left out as well the recent change to the Canada Mortgage Bond Program, which should result over the next decade, in theory, about 300,000, given that it accounts for about 30,000 additional homes every year.
Now we're at 900,000.
And here's a key point. No one of these policies is going to solve the housing crisis. We need to pull every lever that we have. There's going to be more to come, but this is also ignoring programs that exist that we've advanced over the past
you said the
number of
housing
years,
crisis
such as
is
the
now.
National
Why
Housing
aren't you
Strategy.
pulling all the levers now? If the housing crisis is now, and we know it is, why are you saying we have to pull all the levers and you haven't pulled them? You yourself said it's a crisis.
By your own analysis, in the past few weeks, we are responsible for nearly 1 million new homes, given the math that you've just laid out before the committee. If I keep that rate of productivity up, we're going to be able to get there.
But that's your estimate that's your estimate over 10 years. They're hypothetical homes. People can't live in hypothetical homes. And you've just said we need to pull out all the levers. How are all the levers the sum total of 900,000 homes when we need to build 3.5 million?
I don't believe that we have yet pulled all the levers. It turns out when you try to develop a handful of new policies that are going to make a meaningful difference and unlock hundreds of thousands of homes for Canadians,
the crisis isn't weeks old. The housing crisis is years old. Why is it taking you so long to find these levers?
Mr. Seaback, and thank you, Minister.
Mr. Chair.
Next, we have Ms. Koutrakis. Madame Koutrakis, la parole est à vous. Vous avez 5 minutes.
You have the floor, Ms. Koutrakis.
For joining us at this late TRAN committee. I'm sure that you've had a pretty busy day, as we all have on Wednesdays. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Canada Infrastructure Bank and how important is it to leverage the dollars such as those through the CIB and other government programs to accelerate infrastructure projects?
So one of the things that we've got to come to grips with is that we have an infrastructure deficit across Canada. And despite making record investments as a federal government over the past 8 years, there is more to do. And this applies actually equally to housing as it does to infrastructure. We should be looking at new ways to pull capital into the Canadian economy that's going to achieve the social and economic outcomes that we want to see. The Canada Infrastructure Bank is a very good idea. There's in fact been different parts of the world who've advanced similar kinds of ideas, and some of which are playing copycat, so to speak, after the development of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. The strength that the bank has, in my view, is that it's able to identify revenue-generating projects that provide some public good, and it's able to tap into different revenue sources, or rather sources of investment, to fund those projects, which then create revenue that allow the proponent to pay back to the bank over time. When we start with an initial amount of capital in the bank, this allows it to become self-sustaining. When they earn revenue with interest on loans that they make on commercial terms, they're able to protect the initial investment that the federal government makes, but in perpetuity continue to fund infrastructure that would not have been built but for the creation of the bank. So if we want to pull in big investors, pension funds, private development that otherwise would not come, we need to create incentives that allow them to do that. When the bank can put competitive financing terms on the table, often for projects that could not get financing through conventional means, then we can actually see projects go ahead that otherwise would not have come to fruition in Canada.
Do you have any examples of that, Minister, that you could speak to?
Yeah, look, there's a number of projects, and I'd suggest if you want sort of technical explanations of individual projects, we're going to have the department stick around for the second half who can really dig in as granularly as you'd like. The kinds of projects that are starting to go ahead now include water and wastewater, which we've discussed as having the potential to unlock housing, include small modular reactors, which could be a part of the solution to generate non-emitting energy that's going to help power the Canadian economy and potentially create export opportunities down the road. The technology is not here today on a commercial basis, but taking these big investments could actually create the opportunity to develop an industry that doesn't exist at scale. The electrification of transit is a tremendous opportunity. We've got connectivity with a major fiber project in Manitoba that is going ahead. We've got energy retrofits, as was discussed earlier. There's potential for the bank to deal with projects that improve energy transmission across provincial boundaries in my region of the Canada with projects like the Atlantic Loop or components of it. There's no shortage of the kinds of projects, and I actually would value perspective of committee members as to what kinds of other projects we might be able to use the bank to fund, including those, for example, that might unlock the potential for more housing to grow the impact of the measures that Mr. Seaback has drawn attention to during his line of questioning.
Seconds? I have 1 minute left. Thank you. In your opening remarks and throughout your testimony, you've touched upon the public transit. And I'd like to know, in your opinion, what role do you see the federal government playing when it comes to public transit, keeping in mind that there is a jurisdictional challenge always when it comes to public transit?
So communities are going to know their priorities best when it comes to what kind of transit system that they need. Local governments are very good at understanding where the bus station goes, what kind of mode of transportation people need, the appropriate place for an active transportation link to allow people to move through their community in a sustainable way that promotes healthy living as well. The role of the federal government is not going to be to go in and start saying, well, we need to put this project here or that project there. It's going to be to fund good ideas. If we actually come up with programs that communities can apply to, and we can partner with provincial governments to leverage additional investments, we can grow the overall ability of people to move throughout their communities that will promote healthy, livable communities. So the short answer to your question is the role of the federal government is to fund good projects. My sense is on an individual level as local representatives, we can work to help understand what kinds of projects will work for our communities. But as a government, we should fund good projects when it comes to transit.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Ms. Koutrakis. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barsalou-Duval. À vous la parole.
We now have Mr. Barsalou-Duval. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Minister, I had the opportunity to ask questions of your predecessor, Ms. McKenna, as well as Mr. LeBlanc, on a fund that could, in fact, could have provided interesting opportunities to communities like mine. There was a project to have a cycling path to link Boucherville to the other communities on the south shore of Montreal. That could have also been used. The fund could have been used for something like that, and the residents of Boucherville really wanted that. With regard to the Fund for Active Transport, I saw that there were $400,000 that were allotted to a number of projects, but now $1.7 million out of $400 million is about 0.4% of the total that was given to Quebec. Could you explain to us why Quebec got such a small percentage of that fund?
I know it was an extremely competitive fund, but I'm going to have to dig into the details just to make sure I've got the numbers correct. The fund took applications on a competitive basis and made certain different kinds of awards. But until you've sort of phrased it in your question, I had not been aware of the particular percentage. But if you'd like to send a follow-up, I would happily offer a more fulsome response. And if I could signal to officials in the room that we could, if we could provide clarity during the second half of that meeting, I think that would be appropriate.
Vous avouez, moi, que je trouve ça proprement scandaleux.
I found that absolutely scandalous that we would have received only $1.7 million out of $400 million. I was asking your two predecessors whether there is going to be any money set aside for Quebec, since we didn't get much of that money, and I didn't get an answer from them. And they said that even if there was a deadline to apply for this fund, there was still an agreement with Quebec, but the funds were given away without much going to Quebec. I find that very sad. So I hope that I'm mistaken. I hope that you are going to be able to announce that there is appropriate amount of money for Quebec. Otherwise, it is totally inappropriate. Well, unfortunately, there isn't enough time for an answer.
The floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd love to fit in 2 questions in my 2.5 minutes, so I'll go as quickly as I can. The first is I'd love your thoughts on how your government plans to address this issue of construction cost escalations for projects that see a long time period between application and award.
Very quickly, the way that we typically do our funding envelopes is that we can sometimes be flexible on a project-by-project basis with the proponent, but we typically have a ceiling given the spending authorities that Parliament gives us. So to the extent that a jurisdiction would request specific changes to a project that we make a funding award to, it would eat away at the ability for them to fund other projects. We don't have the ability without Parliament authorizing additional spending to simply say yes to every project that has experienced cost increases, which is happening across Canada right now. There are some projects that we are working through to try to make adjustments where possible, but it does have an impact given that there's not an increase to the ceiling of the fund.
Okay, thank you. The City of Terrace has applied to the Housing Accelerator Fund to enable the construction of 180 units of housing. On the national scale, that might not seem like a huge number, but for a community of 12,000 people, that's a significant impact on the housing issue in that community. Now, at a population of 12,000, they fall just over the threshold between the small rural community stream and the large urban community stream. So that puts them in the same funding stream as the City of Vancouver, the City of Winnipeg, the City of Toronto. They're concerned that smaller communities in that larger stream are going to get left out. And I'm wondering what approach your government is going to take to ensure equity between different sizes of communities within that very large range of community sizes.
This question is everything to me. As a local MP, I live in a community that has just shy of 10,000 people. I represent other communities that have just more than 10,000 people, depending on how you define community. I want to personally engage to the extent that I can to find the best applications that are going to build the most homes for the and provide the greatest value for money. Communities that have just over the threshold that puts them in a new category will still be eligible and will be given full consideration. There are some very large cities that have been identified as growth leaders that we are going to be addressing first. Some of them have been announced already, but those who are not amongst growth leaders who've been experiencing significant population gains in recent years, but still have a population large enough that they fall into the stream you've mentioned, will absolutely be eligible and will be given fair consideration. And my constituents would not forgive me if the otherwise was the case.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours once again. You have 5 minutes.
Now, Minister, the Canadian Home Builders Association appeared at this committee recently for a study adapting and resilient infrastructure, and several witnesses called for the affordability principle to be a core principle in the National Building Code. Now, your government proposes some changes to the National Building Code under its emissions reductions plan, and that has been criticized by home builders as potentially increasing the cost of housing by an average of 8%. Minister, I'm assuming that your department has done its analysis of the proposed regulations. Can you guarantee Canadians today that the emissions reduction plan won't raise the cost of housing for them?
One thing that I think is fair to acknowledge is it's cheaper to build a home that will result in more pollution. It's also cheaper to build a home that's dangerous to live in. There are certain minimum standards I think we need to insist upon if we're dealing with modern buildings. I can't live with myself if I'm going to adopt policies that are going to result predictably in greater risks of the consequences of climate change impacting my community. If we can ensure that when we advance programs that are going to build new homes, that we're actually building homes that won't make worse the climate crisis and won't endanger families, for example, by ensuring we have a building code that is up to snuff, then I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do the responsible thing and build homes that will, at a scale that will help achieve the supply gap, but also protect
Minister,
us against the consequences of climate change.
That is a fair answer, that it will cost more to build these types of homes, and that's what this regulation, the emissions reduction plan, will essentially do. So the conclusion of the Home Builders Association was not incorrect based on your evidence. I'm going to move on. In June, your department tabled a 5-year review of the CIB as required by legislation, and your ministry's 5-year review of the $35 billion infrastructure bank read essentially like a brochure, a pat on the back for what many people have said is a failed bank. I submitted an order paper question on this review, and I received back this document, which was full of blanks, no answers, just blank columns completely. And I asked your department through the order paper question for information specific to the submissions from that stakeholders made. And like I said, I got back 40 pages of just blank columns, empty columns. I find this lack of transparency very astounding, Minister, and I am seeking from you today a commitment that moving forward there will be a spirit of transparency in providing this committee with the specific submissions made by the stakeholders that informed your review of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Can I get that commitment today, Minister?
I want to approach all things in a spirit of transparency, and to the extent I can bring that spirit to the operations of the bank, I would like to. And just a further offer, if you want to dig in, we will have officials here during the second half of this meeting who know the bank inside and out. Hard to comment specifically on the document. I'm not sure which document you're referring to or why there may have been blanks, whether they were zero values or redactions, I'm not sure. But to the extent that we can approach this with a spirit of transparency, I think that's good for all of us.
How many minutes do I have?
You have 1 minute, 20 seconds, Dr. Lewis.
Minister, I know that projects have been discontinued under the Canada Infrastructure Bank projects have been discontinued, yet they did not appear at all in the review. May I understand why you omitted certain projects from that review?
I'm not sure about the specific projects that would have been omitted from the review.
Fortis, for example, the Fortis project.
Look, I don't have the information front of mind for every project that would have crossed the bank's desk. If you want to send a follow-up, I'll do my best to give you a fulsome answer subsequent to today's meeting. Or feel free to ask officials who will be joining for the second half as well.
I will do that.
You have 30 seconds, Dr. Lewis.
Minister, with respect to the question that my colleague had asked you regarding why is it now that your government is just now proposing policies that will deal with the housing crisis when you have been in government for 8 years, why is it that these policies are just coming out now?
15-second response, please, Minister.
We started in 2017 with the National Housing Strategy. It was uniquely focused on low-income housing that was operating primarily outside of the market. We've had a renewed focus because we've seen the landscape change and more middle-class families need homes as well at a rate that perhaps wasn't as prevalent in 2015 when we formed government. Happy to elaborate in a subsequent answer.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Dr. Lewis. Next, we have Ms. Murray. Ms. Murray, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, and I will be sharing the last minute with MP Maurice. Congratulations on your new assignment, Minister Fraser, And I'm going to be talking about the part in your mandate that mentions investments in green infrastructure. And so just the context that I want to put on the table is that we have an urgent imperative to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. We have strong targets that we share with the international community. We've been making progress, but we are going to have to find more things to do because some of the low-hanging fruit gets picked in the beginning. And so I think I see buildings, housing, and infrastructure and the embedded carbon as an area that hasn't really been explored to the same degree as, say, energy management.
I heard the witness talk about a mandate, and we haven't received a mandate letter yet. Does she have a mandate letter in her possession that we don't have? Because I'd like to be on the same page. I heard her speak about in the mandate.
I have the previous ministers for housing and previous minister for infrastructure mandates, and so I'm looking at those, the areas that are appropriate, and if I called it his mandate incorrectly, I apologize for that, but that has been in the mandate of the government up until now.
Thank you. I accept that. I just heard in your mandate, so I thought that I was missing something not having that mandate letter. So thank you for the clarification.
Well,
Thank
for
you,
that
Dr. Lewis.
clarification.
And Ms. Murray, I stopped your time, so you still have
Okay,
4 minutes
thank
and
you.
2 seconds left.
So the built form and embedded carbon, we will need as a country to account for our infrastructure and how we have reduced the carbon footprint of infrastructure compared with a previous date. That would be part of the calculation. So we also are aware that building with wood, in other words, mass timber construction, is becoming a solution, not so much a solution, but it does replace higher cost or carbon-intensive steel and concrete. It also is fast to build compared with the previous construction techniques. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about how we can advance mass timber construction through your portfolio.
Thank you for this. Absolutely love the question. So it's incumbent, I think, upon all of us to do everything we can to get creative to fight the climate crisis. And one of the things we can actually do is finding technologies or products that have actually been around for a very long time that can sequester carbon. Wood construction is actually one way that we can do this, and in my view, it provides an opportunity to use cleaner building materials, but also sequester carbon in the final product. The other piece that is really exciting about this question is we have an opportunity to fundamentally change how homes get built in this country. We do not build cars today the way that we did 100 years ago. We do not build anything today the way we did 100 years ago, unless you're talking about houses. If we are going to actually solve the housing crisis, we need to build more homes in factories. We need to embrace mass timber. We need to embrace 3D printing technologies that are emerging to figure out how we can build far more quickly. If we actually scale up by innovating the way that we build homes, including mass timber, we can do the right thing to fight climate change, but we can also build way more homes way more quickly. And it's something that I want to pursue vigorously, because if we don't, there is no path forward that will allow us to build the 3.5 million additional homes that we need to solve Canada's supply gap that exists today.
Thank you for being up to speed on that. And I'm a big champion of mass timber because UBC in my riding built Brock Commons, which is a residence. It's 18 stories high. It was a hybrid a mass timber construction. And I am told that it took 3 months from when the hole was dug in the ground to when the students were moving into the residence. 3 months. So it is more efficient, it's cheaper, it's greener, and it's actually better for the forest industry as well because it utilizes wood that might otherwise be waste. So another question I have in terms of the building...
Sorry, Ms. Murray, I'm going to have to make sure that we provide that 1 minute to Mr.
Okay,
Morris.
Am I at my 5-minute mark?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Oh, my goodness. We'll talk later.
It works, it's good for the environment, it's fast, and we should do more.
Thank you, Ms. Murray, and thank you, Minister. Mr. Morris, I turn the floor over to you. You have 1 minute for your question, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Murray, for your kindness. Minister, I just wanted to pick up on a significant concern of my community we spoke about earlier this week. Back in 2017, as we spoke about, the federal government funded $752 million to the province of Ontario to build two-way all-day GO train service from Kitchener to Toronto. In the time since, though, while folks are being left behind on overcrowded buses, the province of Ontario has yet to even commit to a timeline to complete the project. And so can you comment on your personal openness, that of your office and/or officials, to work with my team and I to call for some accountability from the province of Ontario on these federal funds?
Thanks very much, and thanks for the chat earlier this week. I've done a little bit of homework on the project. This is one of many projects that seem to have been hit by COVID supply chain snags. Hold on, I'll continue and hopefully make you happier by the end of my intervention. There are a number of different programs that run into delays or challenges for different reasons. The more serious the problem with the project, the more serious the response can be from the federal government, leading up to withholding funding that was committed to a project in circumstances where there's not a plan to deal with the problems that do arise. Some problems are dealt with. We work with partners to get through them. On this particular project, I'm actually happy to make a team of our officials available to you to discuss top to bottom where we see the challenges and opportunities to move the project forward. I would rather not get to a place where we have to have conversations about withholding funding. I would rather get to a place where we see the thing get built, and I'll make whoever available to you that you need.
I would very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Chair.
Mr. Morris. And that brings us to the end of the first round. On behalf of committee members, I want to thank you, Minister Fraser, for joining us this evening and for giving us your time, as well as you, Deputy Minister Gillis. We'll suspend for 2 minutes as we switch over our witnesses. 2 minutes. before us, colleagues, in the second hour, we have once again Kelly Gillis, Deputy Minister, Infrastructure and Communities. And joining Ms. Gillis will be Marco Prasuti, Assistant Deputy Minister, Investment Partnerships and Innovation. Seeing as how we don't have opening remarks, we will begin with a round of questioning, once again with Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you for coming here today. And my question is just going to be posed generally, so either of you, whoever you think is best suited to answer the question, can feel free to do so. So the Canada Infrastructure Bank Act states that every 5 years, the designated minister must have a review of the provisions and operations of the Act. We know that the Lake Erie Connector project was canceled. Why wasn't this project and other unsuccessful CIB projects mentioned in the legislative review?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For that particular project, it was the proponent that canceled the project. But when we look at the legislative review overall, it's really starting with the premise of, is the legislation and the mandate, it starts at a higher level than any particular project in and of itself. And a lot of the comments we received 40 written submissions, and I understand from the OPQ you had asked for the summary of the submissions, which we didn't have, but we're happy to provide you with the actual submissions themselves if that's what you're asking for, so you can read what we received from the review itself and taking into consideration the mandate of the bank.
I think it would have been important in obtaining that OPQ for that to have been stated, that we do not have a summary because we did not prepare a summary, but we do have the actual submissions. Because what happens is I get a blank document, and the blank document suggests to me that there was no communication, that your report was not based on anything. And that's somewhat misleading. So I think that I appreciate that you're going to rectify this, but I think that there should have been some indication that there was additional information. And in addition to that, even though the proponent took away that project, it's still a failed project. And so you could learn from your failures. You could learn from why did the proponent take it away. That would have been something that would have been very instructive in the report, and it was not there. And I'm just curious who made that decision and why.
Again, Chair, for the question. When we're taking in, and we met with over 80 interveners and took in a lot of information. In the report, there also are recommendations for improvement with Canada Infrastructure Bank, how they can be more clear on what their mandate is, how to work with the bank, how they can be more transparent on the results. And the bank is taking all of those recommendations in to improve how they work with stakeholders across the country. And so some of the learnings from what's worked with proponents and what hasn't worked with proponents, I think from the Lake Erie, proposal that the proponent chose not to pursue that particular transaction, the bank can take that in and seeing how it can continually improve its interactions to have successful projects. And
I would have liked to have seen that in the report.
48 different projects that they have had financial close with. Mm-hmm. They've got 32 projects under construction. So they have been able to advance in many different areas, as the minister, spoke about in the different sectors.
Thank you for your answer. In Budget 2023, the government announced a new round of Smart City Challenge coming this year. Does the new round of funding criteria take into consideration some of the concerns that Canadians are having, that I'm hearing from municipal councillors about smart cities, smart technologies, and issues of privacy?
Thank you very much, Chair, for the question. The future of smart cities and smart cities challenges is being taken into consideration, and we always want to take into consideration, even in the first round, the different aspects of data and proper use of data by communities. Privacy and governance are very important. And so as technology is evolving, certainly since the first round of the Smart Cities Challenge as well, data and its use of data has, advanced significantly, and any programs that we would put out would take that into consideration. So thank you very much for the comment.
So in considering that, have any policies or regulations been proposed? Because this is something that we're hearing over and over again, and that communications with municipal councillors, they want to give Canadians some assurance that their privacy will be protected with smart cities, and it's something that Canadians are very, very concerned about.
Thank you again, Chair, for the question. As we look at the policies and regulations from the Government of Canada, we follow all of the regulations that are put out from the lead, from whether it's from Treasury Board Secretariat. We do have the CIO for the Government of Canada. We have a Chief Data Officer for the Government of Canada. And in Innovation, Science and Economic Development has also put out guidelines and best practices for use of technology. So all of the best practices that we know of would be taken into consideration, and we're making sure that that would be, shared with municipalities. We also have work with Evergreen and have asked them to work with experts to help municipalities understand privacy considerations.
Isn't Evergreen the company that had that failed project?
Evergreen is a nonprofit organization that works with municipalities on training, on looking at different opportunities to make sure that they've got practices in place within communities. It is not a company, it's a nonprofit organization.
Okay. So how will the first round of Smart City Challenges differ from the second round that you're proposing?
So there hasn't been decisions on the exact program dynamics of the next round of the Smart Cities Challenge. We're taking the landscape into consideration, and we'll be making decisions with the government going forward.
Is there public consultation?
Thank you, Deputy Minister Gillis. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Next, we have Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours, sir. You have 6 minutes. Oh, sorry, Mr. Rogers, you're on mute. We want to make sure we can hear you.
Here we go. How's that?
Can hear you well. The floor is
good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the officials, I was fortunate enough to be in Gander today doing a major announcement on behalf of Minister Fraser. It's an affordable housing project that was done in partnership with the province and the town of Gander, the municipality. So it was a great day, actually, an exciting project for that particular municipality. So from that, I want to ask a couple of questions. First of all, either one of you can speak on this. Can you elaborate more on our government's ambitious plans to support building homes quickly?
Thank you very much, Chair, for the question. As the Minister spoke about, moving forward in working in partnership with other orders of government and looking at all of the federal levers and putting them in place is very important to the government. Working from Infrastructure Canada and bringing infrastructure and housing together is one of those ways as we look at communities and the importance of bringing into consideration the necessary infrastructure investments that are required to be able to densify and augment the housing needs within communities. And then working very much in partnership with the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation and a number of the programs that they have in place right now, such as the Rapid Housing Initiative, such as the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, such as the Co-Investment Fund. So there's a number of programs that exist now. And then looking at, what more is required as we look at the challenges ahead, and very much in partnership with our provinces, territories, and municipalities, as well as the private sector. So a lot of work to do, but as we put, different programs in place, like the GST rebate that just happened, or increasing the financing capabilities of the CMHC by raising the Canada mortgage bonds, that, we're looking at, what more we can do immediately to make a difference.
Thank you. Looking at it from a municipal perspective, as a former mayor and so on, how important are municipal governments going to be in our effort to generate more housing in terms of initiating projects or advancing projects with the province and with the federation or the federal government?
Municipalities are critical. They're at the front line. Housing and infrastructure are very local, and so working in partnership with all three orders of government is going to be critical. And the program I should have mentioned as well is the Housing Accelerator Fund, which municipalities, those are agreements directly with municipalities in giving municipalities funding for them to change and address barriers at the municipal level to be able to expedite and accelerate the housing, building in their own communities. And it's very much tailored to what are the issues within that municipality that need to be addressed for them to be able to make a difference within their communities. And so municipalities would be very, very important in other programs as well, and including the program that you just, in the project that you just announced today.
Yeah, and just to follow up from that, communities, as you said, are on the front lines when it comes to the impact of these projects and funding programs, but also on the impact of climate change. So in particular, in my riding, many of the communities are coastal, and they depend on the water for jobs, food, infrastructure. So what can you tell us about the action the federal government is taking to help increase the climate resiliency of communities across the country?
Thank you very much for the question. When we look at the work that we've been doing on resiliency, it's been quite expensive. It's not just about, which are really important, investments in the capital, infrastructure to make the actual infrastructure more resilient, but it's also how we build. So we've been investing $120 million working with the National Research Council, the Standards Council, to develop new standards and guides to help people build for the weather that we're facing now and into the future. So taking that into consideration, as well as supporting asset management and taking into consideration climate changes with asset management, so communities have better knowledge and tools to be able to be the custodians of the infrastructure that they have with the weather and the severity that they're facing, to be able to ensure that they've got the integrity within the infrastructure. As well, we've got a disaster mitigation adaptation program that has just closed, which is about $1 billion. So we'll be making more capital investments in both the built environment as well as natural infrastructure in the near term.
Mr. Chair, I don't know how much time we have there.
You have 1 minute, Mr. Rogers.
Okay. So when it comes to disaster mitigation, many of the communities in my riding have been experiencing coastal erosion and major problems. Recently, I was fortunate to have 4 projects approved in my riding to do things like coastal work with armor stone and that kind of thing. And, it's really valuable and important for these communities. So in future, are we going to continue to fund that or expand that kind of program?
So as I mentioned, we were just doing a final round with the funding for almost $1 billion. And actually we have, in coastal erosion, we've invested in 11 projects for $252 million. So it has been, a significant investments to mitigate against that particular threat to our communities. Floods has certainly been the largest threat that we've been investing in, about 2/3 for $1.7 billion. But because we've had a number of projects that have already been approved, but right now we just closed an application and we'll be making decisions over the coming months on further investments.
Much. Thank you, Deputy Minister Gillis, and thank you, Mr. Rogers. Next,
thank you.
Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou Duval. À vous la parole.
We have Mr. Barcelou Duval. 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Ms. Gillis. I don't know how long you've been at this department, but it seems to me that you're nearly part of the furniture. So you must be able to answer the questions that we are going to ask you today. In fact, I have one for you in particular. I didn't have the opportunity to ask the minister earlier. With regard to the effect of inflation on the city's budgets, there are a lot of municipalities who call us up and say, look, we have a problem. We've put in an offer to have a sports facility built, for example. And finally, it's going to cost twice what we had budgeted. So they communicate with the provincial government to see if they're going to increase their financial contribution. And so they say, yes, they will. And then they ask the federal government whether the federal government could increase its financial contribution, and they are refused, and so the projects cannot go ahead. I was wondering whether your government can do anything about this, and when you're going to review your policies to make sure that the projects can go ahead despite the increases in cost. the federal government's contribution should also increase since everybody else is also paying more? Thank you for your question. When we look at the projects and we look at increases of prices, we look at them on a case-by-case basis to see whether there are any options. We look at the scope of the project, for example, and see whether we can work with the community or the province to see what options exist. With regard to future programs, we need to look at the contingency funds to make sure we can have a little leeway for the changes in budget. What we try to do now is to deal with the matter on a case-by-case basis by looking at the different options in cooperation with the Quebec government. Sometimes we have had solutions and other times not. It really depends where the project is and what type of construction it is. Thank you for your answer. Another question I have for you is the following. We talked about the importance of adapting to climate change. I think it's very important. But the witnesses that we have heard say just about the same thing. There isn't enough money for that. You said that it's no longer possible to apply for the fund. What do you tell cities who say they need money to adapt it to climate change? Thanks again for the question. The program that we had for the funds, it's come to an end. As of a few months ago, one can no longer apply. There are nonetheless going to be more investments in infrastructure to adapt to climate change. And we're going to look at other programs for the future once we've made some final decisions about the current program. At the same time, we're making investments in the standards and the tools to help communities better cope and to do what they have to do when they plan projects so that they have more resilient infrastructures. How much time do I have left? You have 2 minutes left. Perfect. Here's my next question. With regard to the infrastructure bank, in the solutions that were suggested, with regard to the crying needs of communities, perhaps there could be provinces and municipalities who could attend the decision-making discussions. For example, when that bank decides to carry out a project in Quebec, is there a process whereby the bank has to discuss the matter with Quebec, even though it's an infrastructure project by the federal government, but it is going to be on Quebec soil? For the infrastructure bank, the investment decisions in projects are strictly bank decisions, and they're made under the auspices of the Board of Directors. When it comes to a government-wide project, there are a lot of discussions. It's not just with us, it's within the bank itself, and they are the ones who make the appropriate decisions. For the Quebec government, or Quebec communities, I know that there are different projects being carried out in Quebec, and they have had discussions with the province beforehand. So they are going to have discussions with the Quebec government, but there aren't any directives or obligations coming from the department to oblige the bank to do so every time. Thanks for your question. The bank determines its own procedures. Thank you very much, Mr. Marcelo Duval.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here today. This committee has recently gone through a study on adapting infrastructure to face climate change. And from the witness testimony, we heard overwhelmingly that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if I think about the infrastructure deficit in communities across Canada, which the minister mentioned today, it's insurmountable at this point. And with the growing impacts of climate change, I'm wondering what Infrastructure Canada is planning to do differently to address this growing deficit.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the question. As we look at resilience and adaptation, it is a really important area of opportunity for the country and an investment need, but not just, as I was explaining a minute ago, not just the capital investment at the end, but also what we like to explain as a value chain. So doing research. So we have our research program to understand what do we need to know, and from the changes in wind for heat, for green canopies. Well, how do we know those things are going to make a difference? How do we change that into the way we build? So we're investing with the Canada for the National Research Council and the Standards Council on bringing different codes and standards and knowledge into application for communities and for the construction industry. We're also working with tools to be able to provide to communities there's a lot of information out there, but how do you actually practically put that into use? So to be able to know, I live in this community, it's this part of Canada, this is the forecast of change of weather that I'm going to be facing, and these are the types of infrastructure investments and codes that I should be thinking about for my infrastructure. And then also supporting asset management and being able to take that into being good custodians, and then finally, in the downstream, taking that knowledge into consideration and making the right investments for the long term. So that's how we're looking at infrastructure and doing it differently for the future.
So in regards, I'm sorry, I'm going to go quickly. In regards to the knowledge, we know that there is Indigenous knowledge. We know that there's NGOs on the ground. We know that there's public works that have all kinds of information. How is that information getting funneled up to Infrastructure Canada? Because I can think of a number of NGOs that are doing the work on the ground that aren't getting federal support.
Thank you very much for the question. As we look at providing more online tools, and this is part of the National Adaptation Strategy, we aren't looking to do it ourselves. We are looking at doing it through a consortia, and we are working with a consortia of NGOs because they do have expertise on the ground. So it can't all be done by federal public servants. So as part of this and the online tools to be able to provide to clients, it's for them to be able to access the knowledge that they have and be readily available to help them understand the different investments they have to make for their communities. So I agree 100% with you. There are a lot of really good NGOs out there that have fantastic knowledge, and it needs to be able to be shared and then used by communities. And so we're working, with that objective in mind.
Well, that'd be great. I'd love to see you come out to BC and take a look at some of the work we're doing in the watersheds and watershed resiliency. I'm going to just pivot right now to the Infrastructure Bank, because I was disappointed to see that that there was a REIT that was funded through the Infrastructure Bank. I'm not sure if that funding came to be, but I do note that in the mandate for the Canada Infrastructure Bank, they talk about how any savings, they have to be decarbonized, but any savings need to go down to, they even call out tenants in that. So can you let me know what decision behind funding REITs for retrofits, and if any savings are being flowing down to tenants?
Thank you very much for the question. For the Canada Infrastructure Bank, they do have a mandate on the built environment to reduce GHGs and to support retrofits and deep retrofits. That it's their decision afterwards to be able to determine what types of buildings they can get, good reductions in GHGs. And so that particular program would have been about, our investment would have been about reduced GHGs, and more details on that particular investment we'd have to get from the Canada Infrastructure Bank.
I'd just like to request that then, because in the order paper question I received, it said ultimately savings from energy savings, efficiencies, and operating cost savings are passed on to building owners and tenants. And I just want to know how you're tracking that and what happened with that one. And if I've got, how much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
You have 1 minute and 30 seconds
So
left.
I'm going to pivot to transit right now because Infrastructure Canada itself funded part of a study around gender lens in relation to public transit, and we know that out of that study and even on other studies that infrastructure or public transit, women and persons with disabilities are disproportionately affected by lack of transit. And at the same time, women use public transit on different times and more often. So I wonder if you could just share what kind of, when we talk about Inclusive Canada, what's happening with persons with disabilities. You probably know in BC right now that around the Metro Vancouver area, there isn't enough operating funds to offer the Handy Dart service anymore, and it's become quite difficult for persons with disabilities who are being asked to take a taxi where someone maybe doesn't have the skills or even the continuity to work with a person. So yeah, if you could just let me know, gender lens as well as disability lens, what's happening on public transit.
30 seconds, please, Ms. Gillis.
So public transit is a really important investment. We do know it's really important for vulnerable populations. We do use the Statistics Canada Multi-Deprivation Index as we look at, where is transit going to be served and making sure that we understand the different districts and then bringing in housing within this particular ministry and as we look to the future, an integrated approach to make sure that we're not displacing those who need the transit, I think is a really new opportunity.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister Gillis, and thank you, Ms. Cirillo. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of you for being back at committee. And I'm not going to say that you're part of the furniture, although I've been on this committee for a couple of years, and I know you've been here a few times. In my area of the world, in the greater Toronto-Hamilton area, indeed in the greater Golden Horseshoe, gridlock is a daily challenge for many of my constituents and many people. And I know that under the previous government, in the Great Recession, there was a number of investments in transportation highway infrastructure. I can think of one in my community, the 403, where the federal government was the senior funding partner in that. And I know there's multiple levels of jurisdiction, and the province. I mean, in the one I'm thinking about, there was 2/3 from the feds and 1/3 from the province on that particular project. So, what currently exists in terms of transportation infrastructure, highway infrastructure funding programs within Infrastructure Canada, and is there a move away from that? How does that compare to the past?
Thank you very much for the question. In Infrastructure Canada, our mode of investment in urban centres is public transit. And we did have the new Building Canada Fund and the Building Canada Fund that did fund roads and bridges in urban centres. But at this point in time, that would be mainly through where we're looking at trade corridors, through the National Trade Corridors Fund at Transport Canada. So within an urban environment, really we are looking for a mode shift to go to public transit, and that is the investments that we're making for congestion in urban centres.
So is that the political direction, or is that the decision of Infrastructure Canada? Just because, I mean, we're talking about the 4th largest city on the continent. It used to be the joke that Toronto was an hour away from Toronto, and now Toronto is 2 hours away from Toronto or worse. And the minister spoke about moving goods and supply chains. So, and if I read the previous mandate letters, obviously that I could infer from those that that's a priority.
So there is one program, the Canada Community Buildings Fund, that does fund, communities can determine to fund roads and bridges within their communities. That's their decision, and that's the $2.4 billion that is transferred statutorily annually to communities. But since 2015, when our new programming came into being, we've separated where Transport Canada funds mainly infrastructure that has to deal with the movement of goods, and we fund mainly the commuting of people.
$4 billion, which is not large.
The $2.4 billion is the Canada Community Buildings
Right.
Fund.
Switching gears then, previously, the previous minister, when he was at committee, we asked him about performance bonuses for the CIB executives, and I know that CIB isn't directly under you, although this minister did say that if we had questions on the CIB, that you guys would be here to answer those questions. So, have the performance metrics changed, or what how have they evolved in the past year or two in terms of how those executives are being compensated and how that aligns with their objectives?
Thank you very much for the question. The performance metrics are set by the CIB through their annual corporate plan that are reviewed and put before Treasury Board Secretariat and then tabled in Parliament. So that's how their performance metrics are set on an annual basis, looking at the context and the direction that they've been given in the target areas of investment, and then they make their independent, project investment decisions.
Last we heard, there were no projects yet completed by the CIB. Is that still the case?
So they have projects in use right now. The REM is in use. And also they've got some zero-emission buses that they've supported the financing of that are already in use. And they have 32 projects that are under construction right now.
So 34 projects, but
32 projects in construction.
And 2 that are
Les Réseaux
in use.
Électroniques de Montréal is in use. And then some zero-emission buses that they've helped the financing are also in use in community.
So 7 years later, 2 projects in use. Do you find that to be an acceptable rate of progress?
So as the committee knows, infrastructure, especially when you're looking at large infrastructure, takes time to actually go through design, build, construct, and in use. So as we look at, from the financial close to when they're doing, I think they're making great progress in investing in infrastructure that we need as a country.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister Gillis. Thank you very much, Mr. Muse. Next, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just as an extension of that design, build, and the process, but also before that is getting the capacity in place, like the infrastructure, to actually support the capacity that project's going to need, which is what I want to talk about. And quite frankly, I appreciate the discussion because it actually is an extension of the discussion we were having during the Adapting Infrastructure to Climate Change report that we were just completing. And of course, we talked a lot about this, and I'm hoping that the committee, in particular some members of the committee, actually now understand exactly what we were talking about when it came to capacity, asset management, of course, secondary planning as part of communities. And that's what I want to talk about. And quite frankly, it's one of the reasons why I ran in 15, to be up here versus my former life as a mayor, was to actually expand on the ability for the federal government to be more of a partner than it was previous to 2015. And the importance of, because of the infrastructure deficits, the importance of that secondary planning that has to be in place, which municipalities take on to then therefore enable success when they're entering into housing projects and asset management, everything we've been discussing today. But more specific, and I want to get a bit more granular, is on the capacity vis-a-vis infrastructure, water, wastewater, roads, gutters, sidewalks, parks, and even the things that you don't see that cost money with growth-related costs, like policing, fire, EMS, public health, community services, and things of that nature. So it's key because it's bigger than the country when it comes to the cost to leverage those funds with programs like the CIB, the Accelerator, disaster mitigation, GST, but equally, if not most importantly, is the Canada Community Building Fund. And I want to get to that in a second. Because otherwise, basically, the impacts of the finances that you need to make all that happen, if you don't actually leverage those funds with federal, provincial, municipal, and the private sector, is it defaults on the property taxpayer and the capital fixed charge on the water bills. Bottom line, it defaults on taxpayers. So what I would like you to do is talk about how important it is that we actually be a partner in that process. But secondly, speak about the ability that municipalities have through the Canada Community Building Fund to actually accelerate a lot of this infrastructure work simply because they're able to get an annual, and that's the key word here, the annual contribution from the Canada Community Building Fund that accelerates due to debenturing. So instead of pay-as-you-go, they can take on a $30 million debenture, accelerate that infrastructure fund, accelerate the housing and everything else that has to be accelerated with respect to the capacity and the capital work versus pay-as-you-go, and then pay for that debenture over time with that Canada Community Building Fund.
Thank you very much for the question. When we look at the infrastructure that we have in the country, the majority of it, we've got over $1 trillion of assets in the country. 71% of it is public infrastructure. So our ability to be good custodians requires good planning, and to be able to have asset managers who understand the infrastructure that they have, the state it's in, and the state of the environment that it's living in now into the future. The Canada Community Buildings Fund is a predictable, stable source of funding that communities can actually save from one year to the next, and they can plan against. It actually also supports planning. So they can actually use that to be able to do, asset management plans. They can use it to understand kind of the technology that they have to be in to invest, to be able to understand where the investments need to get made. So it's a very flexible program. It has a number of different asset classes that it can invest in for the hard, infrastructure, but it also supports the capacity that you're talking about to do the thinking and the thought leadership to be able to put the plan in place so that you're making the right investments at the right time. And going back to like the integration of housing and infrastructure together, as we look at the need for housing, you do have to have that core infrastructure in place to be able to support the increased number of houses. So that water infrastructure that you're talking about is critical, and the minister mentioned that as well. And we are hearing about that from different communities, is what are the dependencies to be able to make that a realization. And so the investments that we've been making, and since 2015, $79 billion in investments from this department in those types of infrastructures, really important.
Key to that, Ms. Gillis, and I thank you for that, is, and this is the bottom line of the discussion that we're having today, that if we don't have those mechanisms, those levers in place with all these programs that we've introduced since 2015, whether it be the Disaster Mitigation Fund, whether it be the CIB, whether it be the accelerator, the GST, and of course, lastly, as we spoke about, the Canada Community Building Fund, if we don't have those programs in place, then simply put, it ends up on the property taxpayer. And it actually ends up, when you look at your water bill at the end of the month, and you see those two charges on your water bill, one's your operating charge that you can control based on what you use, but one you can't control, and that's your capital fixed rate. And if, in fact, we don't have these programs in place, when you look at that water bill, that capital fixed rate just gets bigger and bigger and bigger because of the work that has to be done. And then the flip side of that, or the other side of that, is your property tax bill. So both rise without these programs. And with these programs in place, it mitigates some of the challenges that the property taxpayer and the water bill payer will otherwise pay.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gillis, it was mentioned earlier that as Deputy Minister, you are the major architect of what's going on because the minister doesn't necessarily know exactly what is going on. You seem to know more about it. The reason I say that is because someone earlier mentioned the mandate letters. Have you received any from the Prime Minister? Thank you for the question. No. The mandate letters, when we get them, it will be directly from the Prime Minister to the Minister, and then I will get them after. I was wondering how you can govern a country when you have mandate letters that date back from 2021, because in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, the pandemic was still raging. So there wasn't the inflation crisis that we have now. Seems to me the situation has changed a great deal since 2021 and now. So if I understand correctly, without having any new mandate letters, the roadmap is still the one that dates back to 2021. Is that correct? We continue with a lot of the programs that we have, like the Disaster Mitigation Fund. And we looked at the entire context of the country when it came to housing, while keeping in mind all of the government's priorities. So you are continuing with everything that was already started, but there isn't really any direction per se. So one last question for you, if I may. The famous gas tax that comes to an end on December 31st. What is going to happen on January 1st to the city of Quebec, for example, if they need some money to carry out their projects?
Mr. Gillis, I just want to make sure that the translation is working correctly for everybody. Is it working good for everybody? Okay. Sorry about that. The floor is yours, Ms. Gillis.
Thank you for the question. Well, the program ends on 31st of March 2024, not on December 31st. We are currently discussing with all of the stakeholders. We have been for over a year now. And we want to make sure that everything is in place before the 31st of March. Thank you very much, Senator Duval.
You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to revisit on that knowledge base and just having those voices at the table and some of the work that you're doing around planning and asset management that you even spoke about. And I want to talk about the Canadian Public Works Association. The Canadian Public Works Association has come to see me multiple times saying that they would like to be able to have a seat at the table to talk about what's happening with their workers on the ground. And we also have mayors around that advocacy table that talk about the fact that they can't even do asset planning because they don't have computers, to do it. They don't have the software, and they're not funded for that through Infrastructure Canada. So I think there's a lot of good knowledge there. So could I ask Infrastructure Canada to please have a meeting with the Canadian Public Works Association and include them in some of these discussions and planning, because it's early days and they deal with the aftermath of climate change all of the time.
I would be happy to meet with them.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much. Then also wanted to go, you mentioned about the planning, and I know that First Nation communities have a very difficult time to plan because their funding comes year by year by year by year. It's very hard for them to plan out. Is there any change planned for First Nation communities to allow them to have longer, not allow them, give them longer planning windows so that they can actually plan for this infrastructure that's needed?
Thank you very much for the question. For Infrastructure Canada, we work closely with Indigenous Services Canada, who are the primary infrastructure funders for First Nations communities, and they are changing the framework to be able to work with First Nations communities for them to have longer lead times and autonomy over the types of infrastructure that they're investing in for their communities.
Great, thank you. And I'll just close with the minister did mention the word social came up in the minister's presentation today, and you mentioned it a couple of times. And I'm just going to say, even to my block member who raised today, how can the mandate still be the same? I think that there is more focus on social infrastructure and why it matters to build community social safety nets. So my question is there a way for the ministry to advise the minister on making changes to the mandates that are given to you? Like, are you able to see things happening in the data and be able to send
10-second response, please,
send
Ms.
that up
Gillis.
to the minister himself?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And finally, we have Mr. Seaback. Mr. Seaback, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you for giving me 9 minutes to take us right to 9:30, as I'm a new member. No, I'm joking. So I want to go back to the questions that my colleague asked about the renovation, the retrofit of the Fairmont Royal York. So obviously, the mandate for the infrastructure bank allows for a project like this, which is a $17 billion equity fund getting a super discounted interest rate for a project, right? This project's inside the mandate that was given by the government to the infrastructure bank. Is that a fair assessment?
As I mentioned before, the infrastructure bank, through the growth plan, was given a mandate to do retrofits and look at the built environment to reduce GHGs and look at different types of investments to be able to allow that to happen.
Okay, yeah. So was there a policy rationale that was ever put forward within the department when they were determining this mandate that said it's a great idea that a $17 billion private equity firm should get below prime interest rates to do a renovation that they could already afford to do themselves? Did that policy rationale ever get looked at when they were setting the mandate for the bank?
So that wouldn't be a policy, that's an investment decision, and that's under the board of directors, accountability and stewardship, and independent of the government. That's an investment decision for a particular project versus a policy decision is looking at how do we reduce in the built environment GHGs by retrofitting buildings. And we know from both the private sector and the public sector, we've got a huge challenge in that regard, and it can't all be done in the public purse. So looking at alternative financing mechanisms as a way to do that.
But a $17 billion hedge fund could probably afford a renovation on its own. So I'm trying to understand, why was the mandate that the government gave to the bank so broad to allow highly profitable equity firms to access these low interest loans? Is there an answer to that? There might not be.
I've already answered the question from a policy perspective.
Yeah.
For the investment decision themselves, what I can do is ask the Canada Infrastructure Bank to provide the clerk and the committee with a rationale of why they chose that investment.
That would be great.
How does it address this?
How does that address, like this particular funding project, address the infrastructure deficit that we have?
As I mentioned, the built environment has significant GHGs. So from a climate perspective, we do need to reduce our GHGs in the country. Looking at alternative financing and a financing way to be able to support both private and public buildings to reduce their GHGs.
Was there any internal department analysis on how many homes the GST rebate would build?
So the GST and tax is under the Department of Finance.
Okay.
So, but the minister had mentioned the number of homes when you were having a discussion with him to 200,000 to 300,000 over a decade. But the analysis would be for Finance Canada, because Finance Canada is the department that does all of the tax changes for the federal government.
Okay. What about for the Housing Accelerator? Was there internal analysis on how many houses that the Housing Accelerator would produce? And if so, would you table or produce that analysis for the committee?
So thank you very much for the question. That analysis would be under the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, who are the proponents for that particular program. And certainly I can ask for CMHC to provide more information on the $100,000 homes.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Why would they choose that?
Would you know why the bank is choosing to give money to a large hedge fund to retrofit a luxury hotel, as opposed to investing in homes where people have financial challenges to try and reduce their carbon emissions?
Thank you very much for the question. So for the investment decision on that particular project, as we mentioned, we will ask the bank for a follow-up on that particular investment. The bank itself does not invest in homes. That would be CMHC who invests in homes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seaback, and thank you, Ms. Gillis. We'll turn it over to Mr. Badaway for one last question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to give the opportunity for Ms. Gillis to actually clarify a lot of the misconceptions that the opposition might have in terms of the questioning just now with respect to housing versus investments. Earlier we heard questions about, I guess, some confusion about some of the programs and how they operate and what their mandates are, et cetera. So if you can just reach back and if you have any clarifications that you want to provide, I'll give you that opportunity with my time right now.
Thank you very much for the question. When we look at the investments in Infrastructure Canada and the importance of those investments, as you've said before, to make communities more vibrant, make sure that the tax base of municipalities is not putting too much pressure on the bills of Canadians. Our programs have been able to make a huge difference. Since 2015, $79 billion worth of investments in infrastructures that make a difference in communities every day, from water, sewer, transportation, renewable energy, a number of different active transportation, a number of different projects that are important for Canadians. When we look at the infrastructure, challenges and the investment needs across the country, we do need to look at different types of tools. The Canada Infrastructure Bank is another type of tool that doesn't rely on grants and contributions, but financing, so it's returned to the fiscal or to the organization to be able to make further investments. So it's good to have a range of different levers at our disposal to deal with the challenges that the country has for the importance of infrastructure investments.
With that said, the Infrastructure Bank, frankly, is money that comes back. It's not money that's coming from the taxpayers. It's just simply encouraging development, leveraging dollars that would otherwise not be available, and lastly, taking care of a lot of the infrastructure, the housing, and other projects that they may apply for to accelerate those projects.
Correct. Out of the 48 projects that they've come to financial close, they've got financing in place for almost $10 billion, but it's a $28 billion worth of investments that are getting made.
And it's up to them to actually apply for those projects, not up to the government.
Not up to the government.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. I would like to thank Deputy Minister as well as the Assistant Deputy Minister for their testimony this evening and for staying so late with us. With that, this meeting is adjourned.